Hi, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining today's session. We will be doing an intro to trauma and the links to addiction with the lovely Dion MacArthur. My name is Jeremy. I am a representative of EHN Canada. We are a nationwide network of treatment centers for addiction, trauma, and mental health. We have facilities located in British Columbia, Alberta, Ontario, Quebec, and Nova Scotia. And we offer high-quality inpatient, outpatient, and online treatment programs. For more information, please visit our website at ehncanada.com. Just in terms of housekeeping, everyone is on mute and cameras are off for today's webinar, but please feel free to use the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen to submit any questions you may have for our speaker. We will try to get to as many questions as we can at the end of today's session. And if you are wanting to turn off the chat preview, please click the up arrow located at the right of the chat box and uncheck the chat preview option. And please remember that this is a professional and inclusive space, and any offensive commentary will not be tolerated nor accepted. Today's webinar is being recorded, as you can see, and we will be sending out a follow-up email sometime mid to late next week that will include a copy of the recording, today's presentation slides, as well as additional resources, and of course, your lovely CEU certificate of attendance. Dion and I are both located in Toronto. Toronto is located on the traditional territory of several nations, including the Mississauga of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. It is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississauga of the Credit. If you are new to this work and want to find out whose land you are on or grew up on, please check out www.native-land.ca. Many more of you may be physically present elsewhere, and I encourage everyone to use the chat function to, where applicable, share whose land you are currently on. Now, to get to today's session, Intro to Trauma and the Link to Addiction, we have the lovely Dion MacArthur. Dion MacArthur has an extensive professional history as a social worker, working with a focus on trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder, and addictions. Early in her social work training, Dion knew working with the field of trauma and addictions was her passion. After obtaining her Master of Social Work, Dion worked with veterans who were homeless and suffering from past trauma and addictions with her long-standing employment within Veteran Affairs Canada. Since then, Dion has worked at Bellwood Health Services for the past 5 years, dedicating her time to the Trauma and Addictions program. Dion has 15 years experience working with military members, veterans, and first responders, and she is excited to also be able to help civilians in Bellwood's trauma program. Please help me welcome Dion. Thank you so much for joining today.
Hey, everybody. Very happy to be here. Thank you, Jeremy, for that introduction. So I have an hour, about an hour with you, 55 minutes. So I have a lot to share. I am really excited to be with you. What I'm going to share with you, I also share on site here with our clients, whether they're in the trauma program or whether they're also in an addiction-only program. And my hope today, even just with some goals of the session, is just to help you maybe understand how all of us, all humans, how we respond to threatening situations. I find that this, even an intro understanding of what happens in our brains, what happens in our body, can help people. Then I'm going to just talk briefly about what makes up post-traumatic stress disorder. And then at the end, I'm just going to touch on the trauma and addiction cycle and some ways that we can interrupt that cycle. Just before I launch into the topic, I just want to mention that even just the word trauma, or perhaps things that I might talk about might be triggering for folks. That's not my intention. However, it might happen, even just the thought of it. So I just, that can be expected. And I just ask that you maybe ground yourself, whether you need to take some big breaths, whether you need to just leave the webinar for a couple of minutes or put your feet on the ground. So I just wanted to acknowledge that because it can bring things up in all of us. Just to start, I would say that, over the past 20 years and every year, the field of trauma is always making new gains in understanding what happens during a traumatic event and what happens that it maybe impacts us in our day-to-day life. So, even up to just 20 years ago, like before that, World War I or World War II, we knew things were happening. We knew people were being impacted, but we didn't really understand it till much later, like about 20 years ago, we started to understand what really happens in the brain, what starts to happen in the body. And they do know that the experience of trauma is not just an event that happens in the past. We carry it with us. And it's my work is to be able to help folks identify in what ways, all kinds of various ways, how is their traumatic experiencing impacting them in their day-to-day life. A definition I'm going to share with you, Jeremy, yep, great, this is by Bessel van der Kolk. He's one of the leaders in the field of trauma. So I like this definition. Trauma, by definition, is the result of exposure to an inescapably stressful event that overwhelms a person's coping mechanism. Normally, when I share that definition, folks, usually what jumps out, a few things jump out. Inescapable. Often a traumatic experience can leave somebody feeling powerless. Something happened out of their control. They can feel helpless. It was unpredictable sometimes. And when I think of how a person is overwhelmed, when a person's coping mechanism is overwhelmed, I picture every part of us can be overwhelmed. Our bodies, our nervous systems, our muscles, our emotions, our thoughts. So every aspect of us can be impacted. And a lot of trauma work is to figure that out, to figure out in what ways has that happened. Let me see, where am I at, Jeremy? On that one there, I just want to quickly note, trauma's, it's complicated. What might be traumatic for one person might not necessarily be traumatic for another person. And there's a whole host of reasons why that might be. It could be how we grew up. It could be we might have earlier childhood experiences, a traumatic, and then one later happens in adulthood. Perhaps we have support, so we were able to process it, all kinds of factors. So it's complex. I find one piece, I don't know why this stands out to me, but it does, that whether we receive support or not soon after, seems to stand out with me, especially with the folks if we keep it inside and we don't talk about it, for all kinds of reasons, fear, shame, we think we're going to lose control, then people keep it in, and we avoid. So that can sometimes make something more impactful. All right, where am I at here? Okay, so Jeremy, you can just flip to the next slide. Thank you. So I'm just going to talk, guys. I'm going to cover these 4 points, and I'm just going to kind of top off my head of what happens in all of us, in our brain, when we are experiencing a trauma response. So and just on this picture here, I know that's pointing out 5 points, but over the next little bit, I'm just going to only highlight or talk about 3, which is the thalamus, the amygdala, and the prefrontal cortex. Okay, so those are the only 3 I'm going to talk about. Despite human evolution, the primary task of our brains is survival, self-preservation, our ability to respond to danger. So this part of our brain is very powerful. What happens, and again, this is an intro to trauma, so it's probably much more complicated than what I'm going to explain it today, but just to get the general idea is that through our thalamus, our brains are receiving information all day, constantly, through our 5 senses, through listening. So right now you're taking in information through your thalamus, hearing my voice. That information is going up to your prefrontal cortex, and where you might be listening, you might be trying to understand what I'm saying. I'm also using my prefrontal cortex to deliver this talk. So that's where our brains are very, very busy, constantly taking in information through smells, through, our ears, touch, taste, and our brains have to process that information. And a lot of information we discard because we don't need to keep all of it. What can happen, though, is when we receive a piece of information that could be possibly threatening, the thalamus, that piece of information goes very, very quickly to our amygdala. And our amygdala is our brain's alarm system. It's our warning system that we could be in danger. And we've all had many, many experiences of this. And what happens, what's quite fascinating actually, is that whatever so I'll give you an example. Right now, I'm sitting in an office space in Toronto, and I'm talking to all you lovely folks, and I'm engaged with my prefrontal cortex where I think. So maybe I'll back up a second. Our prefrontal cortex, is where we think, we analyze, we are logical, rational. If right now, if I heard a really, really loud bang, if someone came barging into this door, if I heard a shrilling scream, or if any of you did where you are, what would happen, right? I would jump. My heart would probably start pounding, and I would stop. I wouldn't be able to, for a second, keep talking. I'd probably, especially if it was, I might look out the window. I might have to just, if it kept going. So that information is getting sent directly to the amygdala. And when that happens, it's happening so fast that it happens before we even are able to understand what's going on. So our amygdala is on the move. It gets our heart going. We start to take in more oxygen. And what's also interesting is that our prefrontal cortex, where we think, where we analyze, it stops being engaged, because when we are in danger, we don't need to think. And actually, it would slow us down. Because if we had time to really sit and think, you know what, geez, I wonder we might be in more danger. So that's where the amygdala takes over for us and gets us in the move. We get adrenaline going, we get cortisol pumping, and it's getting ready to put us into one of our trauma responses of fight, flight, or freeze. I'm going to give you a couple of examples. Let's say that it's dusk time and I'm going to go out. I'm walking out into my backyard, and I see over in the corner something coily in the ground, in the grass, and I leap. My amygdala sees something coily in the grass, and I leap for a second. My heart's going. I think it's a snake. Then I take a closer look. That same information of the coily thing now goes up to my prefrontal cortex, and my prefrontal cortex is able to take a second look, gather some more information, and say, it's just the garden hose. It's not a snake. All is good. We're actually not in danger. Time to calm down. Now, we all know that's happened many, many, many times to us, where we would get startled, or something catches out of our eye and we jump for a second. And then we think, oh, okay, no, I didn't see anything. So that we all know that feeling of how powerful that amygdala can be. And it's great. And it gets our heart going. And we aren't on-off switches. So once our amygdala is engaged, it takes us some time to recover, right? Whoo, we'll be like, oh, geez, thank goodness that wasn't a snake. Or if a car just cuts us off, and it might get us startled for a second, but we're okay, right? We need a minute to just gather our thoughts. The adrenaline has to run through our body. And then we have to realize that we're not in danger. Everything's okay. Powerful stuff, our survival response. What's also interesting is our amygdala. Our amygdala determines fight, flight, or freeze, which usually, well, most folks I work with, if not all of them, find that this is quite an important piece for them to understand how this part of our brain works. Because it's happening it can happen so quickly. The amygdala, if we have, actually, Jeremy, you can flip the next two. So guys, I'm kind of talking as well, not following slides. If the amygdala figures out that we've got enough time, enough strength, enough distance, we're going to flee. Or if the amygdala figures that we have enough strength to defend oneself, it might choose fight. And actually, Jeremy, you can flip to the next one too. Thank you. And then maybe one after that. Perfect. So when these two, when the amygdala chooses either one of fight or flight, this is the sympathetic branch of our nervous system gets going. And that's where we're getting increased heart rate, in taking more oxygen. And this is so we can gather it's sending blood all to our big muscle groups. We need more oxygen. These are all helping us to survive and get away. And that powerful adrenaline and cortisol is going. There's also two, I don't think this is in your slide, but I'm going to mention it. You can flip to the next one, Jeremy. The freeze response. We actually have two freeze responses. One is, which this is the second one that's on the slide, but we have one where it's just like fight flight. Our heart's going, but it's like we're awaiting. We can't flee or fight. It's like a deer caught in headlights freeze. We are literally frozen. And we might be waiting to see if we can flip into fight or flight. There's another kind of freeze, which is this one's on the slide. And this is where they also call this, in the trauma world, they call this response submit, collapse, submit. And this is when the amygdala can determine that perhaps death is imminent. We can't get away. And our body, our nervous system flips into what's the parasympathetic nervous system, where we go more into a shutdown, why we call it shutdown, where our blood is not getting pumped out. Our breathing becomes very, very shallow, and it's trying to protect us from imminent harm. It's a very old part, instinctual. All of this is instinctual. But again, it's coming, it's it's fascinating that our brains do this for us. What I find, I know I said this earlier, but this information with people with trauma or with post-traumatic stress disorder, this can be very helpful for them to understand, because a lot of times people, I'll hear all kinds of things that, oh, if only I would have done that, if only I would have been stronger, if only I would have chosen, why did I freeze? I can't believe I didn't think fast enough. When they learn that we aren't, the amygdala is the part of our brain that's running the show here. What's also, the amygdala is not high tech. The amygdala, I use this example of a Polaroid camera, and the Polaroids where it spits out the picture, and it's fuzzy and it's foggy, and you have to wait till it gets developed. Well, the amygdala doesn't care about accuracy. It doesn't have time to care about accuracy. So just like when I was talking about the coily rope in the corner, my amygdala is getting just a fast, fuzzy picture. Like, that could be a snake. So just in case it is, I got to get you ready. I'm going to get your heart going. So the amygdala is fast, not high tech. Like the amygdala, I don't think would do very well with the internet and Googling, because we don't have time. It's about survival. The amygdala's got one job. It does it very, very well. The other thing, the amygdala works on a better safe than sorry principle. So I'd rather you be safe. Let's, just in case you're in danger, I'm going to get everything going, which is, again, a great thing, but it causes us quite a bit of stress in our body. I also want to mention, Jeremy, you can go to the next slide, please. The fawn response. This one's more recent response. It hasn't been around as long as fight flight in terms of our knowledge of it. Fawn can occur more in traumatic situations that are ongoing, perhaps childhood abuse, whether it's physical or sexual or verbal or emotional or neglect, or even in an adult violence situation, an unsafe ongoing situation where possibly a person is both a caregiver or a person who's loving and providing care, as well as a source of threat. So what the fawn response can look like is people pleasing in a way to appease and please the source of threat. And with an ongoing threatening situation where the person might be walking on eggshells, again, it's a survival response, because it's unpredictable. They're not sure if the person's going to be caring one minute or a threat the next. So if they're always pleasing and appeasing, it puts them in safety. It makes them more safe. What can sometimes happen is folks with the fawn response have a difficult time understanding their own needs or listening to their own needs. And so folks with this, I see even now, right now in present time, that they still can go into a people pleasing and not know how to tap in to their own needs. So just thought I'd mention the fawn response. Camping. So guys, just to bring this to everything I'm kind of just talking about right now, just to bring it to light a little bit in a fun imagination story, I want us to picture that we're going on a camping trip. Okay, could you imagine all of us who are online? Whew, that'd be good. That'd be a good camping trip. Okay, so we're hiking. Let's make it exciting. I see in the picture there's some mountains in the back. So let's say we're in the Rockies, and we've been hiking all day long. we're exhausted, and we finally, this beautiful picture there we got our tents all set up, fires roaring in that crock pot. Oh my gosh, what could be in there? This big, amazing stew. So after we've had this amazing, we had gourmet meal, and maybe we made s'mores after, even though we hiked, we brought some treats with us. So we're all full, and we're relaxed. It's dusk. We need some water. So just kind of down to our right there's actually a lake. So we take our water jug so we can boil some water. And as we're down by the lake, we hear some rustling. And we don't think anything of it. We just kind of continue filling up our jugs, and we turn around and we see a grizzly bear. Let's say this guy's up on his hinds, roaring. Look at this guy's nails. Could you imagine? I can't imagine. So I know you guys can't answer me back very quick, but what would we be feeling in that moment? Right in that instant, right? We might be feeling panic, fear, anxiety, terror. What might we be doing? Yes, heart pounding. Thank you, Ronald. Right? We might be doing, you know what? We might also all be sick. Someone's free. Yeah, we're freezing. We might run, freak out. Yes. We might flight. Some of us might jump in the lake. Some of us might freeze. I always think I would, duck into the tent. Guys, we are going to all respond. Who knows? The amygdala would be figuring out what we're going to do. Okay. What's our body doing? Somebody say, right? Heart pounding. Hands might be clammy. Yes. We might be sick. We might faint. We might scream. What's also interesting, guys, which I didn't say earlier, is that when we are in a fight, flight, when we're in a trauma response, a survival response, we don't need non-essential organs. Thinking is non-essential. Digestion is non-essential. Hence, when we vomit or our prefrontal cortex is our ability to think goes away. Like, you know what, we all have had that feeling where we're just like, we wouldn't know how to think. Are we thinking about our lovely dinner we just had? No, because we might be dinner. So that's an important piece also, guys, just when I'm with teaching people about this, is that a lot of times clients will say to me, why the heck didn't I remember? Why am I not remembering? We're doing that because our prefrontal cortexes are not fully engaged, because if we relied on our thinking, that bear would, I don't know, he'd be more dangerous. So, okay. Yes, we're on overload for sure. We don't have time to Google either. What do we do in terms of a black bear, a grizzly bear? Okay, guys. So now, for some reason, the bear just saunters away, and we go back to the fire. We hear some more rustling, and I look at everybody and say, you know what? I think my camping trip's over. See you later. So I'm back home in Toronto, and I'm walking through this. I love to walk through this big park in Toronto. And all of a sudden I'm approaching the park, and I'm noticing that my heart's going. My hands are a little clammy. So I thought, you know what? I'm just going to stick to the sidewalk. I'm going to detour the park. And then when I approach home, my neighbor, he's across the street. He's got a German Shepherd dog. I've known them for maybe three years. I'm a dog person. I love this dog. It's just the loveliest dog. And same thing. I'm approaching my neighbor and his dog, and I think, you know what, I'm feeling a bit queasy or just uneasy, on edge. So I think, you know what, I'm not going to say hi. I'm just going to go inside. And so then I go inside, I turn on the TV, one of my favorite channels, Discovery is on. And guess what's on Discovery? A special on bears. So I think, great. So I turn it off, fine, right? I don't want to watch TV. I'm just going to go to bed early and I'm going to read a book. So I reach over to my bedside table and what do I grab? Winnie the Pooh. So what's going on here, right? What's happening? Well, a couple of things are happening. In trauma, yes, triggers is what's happening, okay? So with trauma, sometimes what can happen is things get paired. Now, things that didn't have meaning before now have meaning. So like the park, I love going through the park, but now trauma has attached a different meaning to that park. Now, in my brain, that park could be danger now. My neighbor, my lovely neighbor, now a different meaning has gotten attached because his dog is reminding me of the grizzly bear. Oh yeah, another fascinating piece of information, guys, is the amygdala only needs 10 to 20% of the original trauma to make it go off. Remember I said fuzzy picture, fuzzy Polaroid? So it sees, all the amygdala is seeing is German Shepherd dog, animal, fuzzy, I got hair, close enough. Just in case that dog sort of kind of looks like a grizzly, close enough, I'm going to give you a warning sign. Remember, it works on this better safe than sorry principle. Okay, so the good news is that the amygdala is doing its job. The amygdala is warning us we could be in danger. But there's a couple problems with this. The amygdala is warning us during situations when we're actually safe. I'm pretty sure a grizzly sighting is going to be pretty rare in downtown Toronto. There's a very rare chance the dog is going to hurt me. The bears on the TV are definitely not going to hurt me, but yet I turn it off. So we're sensing that we're in danger when we're actually safe. And the amygdala doesn't know time, doesn't know location. The other important piece is that now we're avoiding things that we used to enjoy. I like going to the park. I really like this neighbor, nice guy, nice dog. Now I'm not watching shows I used to like. So now I'm avoiding things that used to bring me joy or I enjoyed. And that's what starts to happen with trauma or post-traumatic stress disorder is a person's life can become smaller and smaller because we don't want our hearts beating and we don't want to feel anxious. We don't want to feel scared. We don't want to feel angry with fight response. We don't want to go into panic attacks. So of course we want to avoid. So my imaginary camping story with the bears, just to highlight, it's just a simple example as to how fight, flight, freeze can happen and how that can impact our everyday life moving forward. Let me see where I am now. So, Jeremy, let's see. How am I doing for time? Okay. We can go on to the next couple slides. What I thought I'd just highlight also for you, the difference between, let me see what's on this slide here. So yes, normally, right? So normally, even just with the bear story, right? You know what, we all experience these, our fight flight going off, and then our body takes it goes down to homeostasis. It calms down after the adrenaline has run its course. Our nervous systems calm back down again. But what can happen with, which I'll talk about in just a second, is it's when our bodies don't realize the danger's over. That's when we start to run into some in present time. Okay, and I thought I would just, that's perfect, Jeremy. I just want to touch on brief that there's a difference between trauma and PTSD. I think in today's society, often the two go together. But many folks, right? Many of us will experience something traumatic in our life, and we may have symptoms that are similar to post-traumatic stress for a period of time. We may have experienced something in our life where there's a trigger when maybe it's an anniversary day, maybe there might be something that we all have some triggers about. So we might have a traumatic experience that's emotionally difficult to cope with at certain times. But what happens with post-traumatic stress is that if these symptoms, which I'm going to go through in the next slide, which when they persist for a long period of time and they're just not going away, I see PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. It's like somebody has gotten stuck, and the work in therapy, in trauma work, is to help people figure out how and what is keeping them stuck in not being able to recover. PTSD we can completely recover from PTSD. It's a lot of work. It doesn't happen quickly. It can be done. Let me just go over here. So post-traumatic stress disorder. In the old DSM-5, it used to be under the anxiety disorders. Now it's got its own category that involves the trauma piece. So here, just quick, folks, there's 4 categories, okay, of what makes PTSD. And so someone to meet the criteria, you have symptoms in all 4 categories. The first one's re-experiencing. People are all going to have their own combination of symptoms. This is however the trauma is intruding on us, how we're remembering it. So it could come in intrusive memories, just out of the blue. We don't even need a trigger. Triggers are not on that list, but triggers would go there. So trauma triggers, things that have gotten paired together, that would go under re-experiencing. Some people have flashbacks. Some people have nightmares. However, we're recalling. The next category is arousal symptoms. So this is kind of like our fight flight, right? Often people with post-traumatic stress, they're on edge the majority of the time. So that's the hypervigilance, right? So they're can't calm down, watching their back. They might have an exaggerated startle. So, but just earlier, guys, what can happen with post-traumatic stress is that the body hasn't figured out that the danger's over. And so now there's cues, and it's once a person's body has been on high alert, we have to teach people how to regulate themselves, right? It's scary for them to calm down because they're so used to being in that ready danger. So part of trauma work is teaching them through cognitively, they're not in danger, and through their bodies. Other arousal symptoms, sleep problems, irritability. I find some people find it also, they always find this helpful to understand, right? They think, I don't know what's wrong with me. I used to not be this irritable. I used to not have anger outbursts. What's happening? It's part of it, right? People also with post-traumatic stress disorder, I find they have a roller coaster of emotions. 1 minute they're up in a panic attack or anger, then they're down in depression and low energy, then they're up again. And so that it's overwhelming and confusing when they don't, maybe I haven't put the pieces together as why is making them do that. It's part of it. The third category, negative mood and belief. So over time, one's overall mood can start to change. Perhaps they're more low. Everybody's going to be different. Maybe they have more low mood. Maybe they feel numb. Maybe they feel a lot of guilt, shame. They can't seem to feel, it's harder to feel positive emotions. They feel disconnected from other people. Then thoughts also change. So trauma can really impact a person's perception. They might have, I'm just going to throw out some ideas. They might have thoughts like, it's my fault. I should have run faster. I should have fought back. If only I would have done that, it wouldn't have happened. I can't trust anybody. If I trust people, they're going to hurt me. I can't trust myself. The world's a dangerous place, on and on. I'll never get better. They can feel hopeless, on and on. And so over time, their perception of themselves, other people, and the world drastically changes. The fourth category, avoidance. So avoidance helps. So avoidance is going to look, people are going to actually avoid people or locations, those triggers. They're going to, they don't want to leave their house. They're going to isolate. And we also, people with post-traumatic stress disorder, avoidance is a solution. Avoidance helps them with all the other categories. It helps they don't want their bodies, right, to be hypervigilant. They don't want to feel anxiety. So if I just stay in my house and avoid these triggers, I'm not going to have to feel that horribleness. We also can avoid, you know what, Jeremy, I think I'm going to get you to flip to the next one because it shows avoidance as well. So guys, I'm just on this, I'm just going to flip right into this one too, is that down under the void. So pain, up in the pain, this is the trauma addiction cycle. I really like this cycle because it's a great teaching tool to show people how trauma, it's the fit, why they go, I shouldn't say go so well together, but they do. It's common. It's very common because it helps them. So up on the pain part would be the three categories I just mentioned. Okay, the re-experiencing, the arousal. So this is the hypervigilance, the irritability, the anger outbursts, can't sleep, can't think, can't concentrate, distress, all kinds of distress, and also all of the thoughts, right? I can't trust anybody. I'm a terrible person. I'll never get better. The avoid is the fourth category of PTSD. And underneath that, we could have a whole host of behaviors under there. So here's where you're going to see substances, alcohol, cocaine, marijuana. You're going to see food, binge eating, restricting, gambling, sex, overworking, over-exercising, gaming, video gaming, you name it, high risk behaviors. So all of these guys, and again, I always tell folks, it's your clever way of trying to find a solution to all the pain you're in, because it temporarily works. It actually gives them a sense of relief, which is why they do it. Whatever it looks like, doesn't matter what it looks like. Then you go down onto the next part of the trauma addiction, temporary relief. What happens when we're engaged in the avoidance behaviors is that we get a release of dopamine. We can get a release of endorphins, which that's in our brain's reward pathway. So our brain's reward pathway, feeling good, dopamine hormones, it feels like it's balancing and counteracting our survival trauma responses, but it's temporary. So, but it works, even just for a little bit. But now what starts to happen is the dependence, the addictive piece. Now we're needing it more. Possibly what could happen. Now we're starting to rely on it. Now we're starting to need it. And hence, and I tell folks too, we don't really realize this is what one's doing. But maybe they're starting to drink a little more. Maybe they're shopping is another one. And then with COVID the last couple of years, PTSD really loved COVID because they didn't have to make excuses to leave their house, or they could avoid people. So slowly but surely, our avoidance behaviors could increase to the point where now so the thing that started helping them, the behavior that started helping them now starts to it becomes an issue all on its own. I kind of see the trauma addiction cycle. You got the trauma addiction cycle, and then this behavior, this avoidance thing that started to help you. Now you got two cycles. Now you got your PTSD over here, and now you've got the other cycle that now has its own diagnosis, its own issue. Okay, so back to my cycle here. Then what starts to happen is now we've got other life complications. Maybe there's difficulties in one's relationships, legal matters, financial matters, their physical health, it starts to take its toll. All kinds of things, okay, can go into life complications. And now the original, sorry, I'm pointing to the screen like you can see me. But the original pain is still there. So the thing that started to help us, the avoidance, now has actually made life more complicated. And we've still got the original pain, the original trauma, the original PTSD symptoms. So my work is, understanding how this works. This can be an eye-opener for people. Because they can finally be like, oh, now I can see why I'm doing this. How do we break the cycle? We have to stop avoiding. PTSD, the avoidance, whatever that looks like for people, shopping, alcohol, not leaving their house, sex, whatever it is, the avoidance maintains the PTSD. The avoidant behaviors make it stronger. So folks have to stop avoiding, which is really, really hard to do because that's what makes them feel better temporarily. But avoidance has to be, we have to stop avoiding. Then, getting to look at the pain. We got to look at that pain. Guys, trauma, I could be here for a lot longer than this hour, but trauma work is tricky work. But yeah, there's some great tips right on that slide. That right, I always say to clients, one of the first steps is gaining self-awareness. What's happening? What am I feeling? Because they've gotten so used to running away and avoiding, to be able to just be, what am I feeling? Which is scary. I have to feel. But why am I reacting? What are their trauma triggers? What's making their body react like it is? So a lot of knowledge, a lot of psychoeducation. In trauma work, they talk about, maybe you guys are aware of this, but the bottom up, top down approaches we have to use. So we have to calm the amygdala and the nervous system, which calms the brain. We have to calm the thinking and the prefrontal cortex and thoughts, which calms the body. So we got to work both directions. Becoming more familiar with what's happening with our body. And another important piece, some of the simplest things can help. I get clients here to brainstorm what can help them break this cycle, all kinds of simple, like just even having a healthy routine, going to bed early, or not early, regular time, getting their bodies into a regular routine, eating well, exercising well, connecting with people, laughing. I find a lot of folks tell me they've forgotten how to enjoy life. What used to bring them pleasure? Riding their bike, watercolors, woodworking, finding slowly but surely, starting to feel again, starting to unpack. It takes some time, but it's doable, and take things slow. It's definitely doable to recover from PTSD and addiction. And the clients know, I always tell them it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work, and to be kind, they need to be kind to themselves, be patient. Look, so I'll stop there. Questions?
Dion, thank you so much. I really appreciate all the information you shared with us today. And just echoing what everybody's saying in the chat, thank you for providing your lovely anecdotes and your lovely stories to basically make things a little bit more bite-sized and understandable. Myself, not being in this field, like I learned so much about trauma and the links with addiction too. So thank you again for all of that.
Thank you. I'm just happy to be here with you guys.
Of course. So we have time for questions. Yeah, no need to be the bear, but we can get into some questions. So just going back to like the previous descriptors you used for the brain, is the initial trauma response stored in or around the amygdala?
Is the initial trauma response
Stored
the
in?
amygdala? Yeah, the thing too is it could be stored in the amygdala. Also, things can be stored in the hippocampus as well. What's interesting, like sometimes, but not always, sometimes people might have later response, like if they have a trauma cue, if their initial response was a flight response, they might go have another flight response when they're cued, but not necessarily. Sometimes our amygdala will do what it needs to do.
Yeah, I think kind of how you said at the beginning too, everyone experiences trauma differently, right? So, and many people are aware of this dealing with mental health and addictions. It's very patient-centric.
Yeah.
It's individualistic, right? So I think it kind of just is dependent. But yeah, thank you for that. And then there's a couple more that we can get to. So an interesting question too, how can you tell the difference between trauma and just depression?
Trauma, well, for me, it would be easier to answer if it was just let me think a second. PTSD is very clear. Depression can be part of PTSD. Often there's comorbid diagnosis. So one could have PTSD and depression. Or people can have, PTSD and generalized anxiety disorder as well. With PTSD, There would be a criterion A, like there would be an actual event, right? An actual event that was experienced or witnessed, or many events, where depression doesn't have to have an event, but it could. So you might see them together, but you could also see depression as a standalone. So it would be the event piece. Depression, I find people have just a more sense of like helplessness, low self-esteem, hopelessness, which can also go with PTSD. I don't know if I answered that clearly.
No, I think that makes sense, where there can be obviously like specific events or incidents that can cause trauma or be like the derivative of trauma, where depression can just exist, kind of thing. And not that trauma can exist too, but that there's usually a clear definitive event that kind of
Right.
Perfect. And then yeah, just to kind of wrap things up, we have one last question. They are asking more so about like people forgetting details within a traumatic event. So does the amygdala have any correlation with why people might forget details of a traumatic situation?
It's very common. It's very, very common. Few things. And actually, I find a lot of clients feel bad about that. Like they'll tell me, they'll be like, Dion, I don't remember it all. And I'm like, you're not supposed to. You might, like some people get such clarity, or some parts are really clear and others aren't. Remember that when we are having a trauma response, that when that amygdala is running the show, our prefrontal cortex, where we think, is offline, or it's greatly diminished. It's not engaged. So that's where we get fragmented, because our brain's only focused on getting or keeping safe. The other thing which could happen is our brains, especially, this is coming into my mind right now, an ongoing childhood situation, let's just say. A person who's might be dissociating. So they might purposefully dissociate as a protection. So dissociating in the time of a trauma is helpful, because it makes it more tolerable. Again, why they might not remember, because it's the brain's way of being able to tolerate the trauma in the moment. So there could be a few things why they don't remember. It makes sense why they don't. But once clients realize that, they're like, oh, okay, I'm supposed to not remember everything. Okay.
Yeah, I'm sure it's enlightening for them to like realize that they're not supposed to. So it's probably gratifying for them. But thank you so much, Dion. Unfortunately, that is our time. But again, just to echo everybody's lovely messages and thanking you for a wonderful and informative presentation. A lot of people really benefited from the campfire story analogy. So they said they're going to take that to their client sessions and utilize that within their trauma scope. So there's a great takeaway from there, and also some great information within this presentation. And again, thank you so much for your time today over this hour.
Thanks, everybody. Okay, take care. Nice being with you. Bye-bye.
And to everyone else in attendance today, thank you so much for your attendance. And as mentioned previously, we will be sending out a follow-up email sometime mid to late next week to all that attended and registered, with a copy of Dion's lovely presentation slides, a copy of today's webinar recording, as well as your CEU certification. Thanks so much. And until then, take care.